Welcome to today's watercolour demo. This video is from a YouTube live stream, Artfully Yours by Diana. And I'd like to thank Paul for letting us use his photo of Mount McLaughlin. I'm using a small hake brush to thoroughly wet this Bockingford 300 pound watercolour paper. It's rough and I'm just really splashing a light wash all over the paper itself, just to get a basic wash everywhere, which will be a key colour. It's a deep blue colour. I didn't go for a light blue. I wanted it to be a little bit more atmospheric. Timing is really important in this process, as I'm pulling off some of the excess watercolour paint. This helps create the feel of clouds, and also I've been able to take some of the paint away from the one side of the mountain. Now it's all thoroughly dried, we can start working on the mountain. And as it's a distant object, I don't want to be doing too much detailing. I'm using a fairly dry brush here to get scrapey, kind of rocky, jagged kind of feel to the painting. At the right side, that's where the least amount of light is, so I'm going to be making that fairly dark, and we'll taper that off so it's not too hard. And again, while that's wet, I'm going to try to remove a little bit to create texture by dabbing some water on and lifting up some of the paint off of that side. Always remember that your paint will dry a lot lighter than when it's wet, so be aware of that. I'm going to put a slightly different blue in here now, and I start off with a big brush, but then I move into a slightly more detailed area. This mountain, as you can see in the reference, a snow cap, so I want to illustrate that and do it in a slightly detailed manner. And this is the only detail that I'm going to be putting in it, as it is quite a bit of a distance away, the mountain. I'm using the small rigger brush to work at this area of detail. A very good brush for getting these kind of very fine areas. They're normally used for just doing straight lines, but you can also use them for doing jagged rock areas like that need a bit of fine detail. I'll keep working at this until I feel that there's enough detail in the mountain for it to look realistic, and constantly adding extra areas of dark area. I don't want it just to be one blanket colour. This will help with the texture of the rocky mountain. You've got to think that it's a jagged piece of rock, and just final little bits of detailing. But always remember that this is a distant thing, so you want to have some interest, but you don't want it to be overly burdened with detail. I'm just going to pull and lift off with a piece of paper some of the paint to give it some more detail. With my pointed mop quill brush, I'm getting some light areas into this forested wood area, and the tops always of these forests tend to be a lot lighter than the dark bits. Now the paper is elevated slightly, it's got a slight angle on it, so that's helping me with it coming down a little bit. But as we progress into the painting, I will put darker greens into that area of the tree. We're picking up some more paint now, and we'll start putting a slightly different colour green in, more in the foreground, and let that blend in slightly with the rest of the colour, and that gives it like a sense of depth and tonal value. Now the first colour were a very yellowy green, but this one's a much more, what you would call a green, and don't just be mechanical with this. Try different shapes and forms with your brush to create that sense of difference and randomness, but also give it a certain amount of consistency so we know that the trees. It's always a good thing with this particular situation to try and let your layers of paint dry a little bit before you put another layer on, or they all just blend into one mush. So timing is important in doing, especially these trees. I've given it a few, a short amount of time before I put this slightly drier painting, and that will resist a lot more against the wet paint, and again create more texture and sense of difference between one tree in one area and another tree elsewhere. And also, as we're getting lower down, you can notice it's getting darker, so that's the right formula: light at the top, dark at the bottom. And you can keep doing this layering and build it up as much as you want, but don't overdo it, because it will then become quite muddy. I'm putting various bits of almost greyed out green, like an olivey kind of green, in against really strong vibrant greens, and that again helps with that foreground background kind of feel. So we're coming to a point where that's almost done, and we'll be moving on to another part of the painting, but we must make sure it's all dry before we do so. Now that's completely dry, I'm using the hake brush that's been really dried out, and I'm getting a dry mix of dark blue. I'm going to put it over the distant part of the water. It's already got a light wash of blue on it, but we've made a slightly darker blue, and we've used the grain of the paper, the roughness, to create ripples in the water in the distance, and we'll progressively make that stronger as we come more and more closer to ourselves and we see more and more detail. So that's what you see me doing now. I'm using a fairly dry brush and fairly dry paint, and I'm building up the waves around the boat now. Again, we have to, between each one of these layers, leave it to dry slightly, so that they don't just blend into one colour. We're layering and glazing over each individual layer so that they can leave their own mark in the painting. And another darker layer of this dry brush technique, and it's starting to look like it's a windy, choppy day on the river, or lake or whatever it is. Most of the painting is in the distance and doesn't have a huge amount of detail, but the boat is what you would normally consider to be the middle distance. There isn't any foreground detail, so that's going to be the most prominent thing in the middle distance. So we need to be balanced about what we do with the detail for the boat. I'm just putting some extra bits of waviness in the water because it dried a little bit light, so that will help create that extra bit of waviness. You may need to do this a few times with certain parts of the painting, going over various bits as it does dry quite a bit lighter. We're getting into the boat now, and the boat really is a fairly simple affair. It's white, but because part of it is facing away, quite a bit of it is in silhouette because the sun is facing towards us. It's mainly a blocked out silhouette with little bits of light hitting it, really. We're starting now to get the boat and various segments of it roughed in. There's a couple of people in the boat, so they will at some point be going in. Once we've got some light areas in, I can start defining the boat a bit better with some dark areas, and again this will probably take 2 or 3 layers, and you'll need to dry those between each layer to create a glaze. And always a tricky one, the mast of the boat. Just be careful. If you need to and you're doing this, use some sort of system where like a maul stick or a ruler that you can go against to make it straight. I've just about got away with that one, and we'll start to look at other bits of detail on the boat, such as, I don't know what they call that other thing that sticks out, but I paint that right now, this one. If anybody knows what it is, they can tell me, because I don't really know boats that well. So it really is, and again it's about having that balance with how much detail you put in. It's not a hyper detailed painting, so we don't want to be making the boat stand out like a sore thumb by creating huge amounts of detail around it. It is in the middle distance, this boat, so again it's something that you need to continue to be balanced with throughout the painting. The fact that most of the things in the painting are very far away from us, and I want to give that sense of distance as well. If we put detail in, it's going to damage all that idea of it being a fair distance away from you. We've done almost all the detail we need to do on the boat part. We're looking now at the sail area, just defining that out, and really, I mean, I've left the majority of the sail white. I've not worked on it at all, so that I can later in the painting add some grey tones to it, and that's all you really need to do for this. Just add that sense of depth with the grey toning on it, and that will be in keeping with that only slight detailing that we're doing with the majority of the painting, and it keeps the art simple as well. So just working the other larger sail now, and again this sail will be slightly angled away from the sunlight, so it's not going to be purely white, even though the sail is probably white. It's going to have bits of deeper colour to it. So we're getting those little bits of detail in, and we're not too far away from a completed image. With the boat being finished, I want to just briefly go back over various bits that I'm not 100% happy with and might need a little bit of tweaking. As you can see, I'm going back over the forested area, putting a few bits of detailing in there that might give it a little bit more definition. And there you go, really, that's the painting pretty much complete. I may go back over bits later, but that's it. Well, that's the video over. Just a quick recap in time lapse. I'd like to thank you, Paul, for the photo, and Diana for letting me be on her live stream and demonstrate this painting. If you like what you see, please subscribe. If you're already subscribing, please click the like button, and thank you for being here and watching this video. We'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.